Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Sian Norton, the manager of Refresh, an NHMRC-funded Centre of Research Excellence focused on increasing the healthiness of retail food environments, which is led by Alfred Deakin Professor Anna Peters. Anna also leads the Nourish Network, a multi-sector collective working to increase the demand, availability and access to healthy, sustainable and affordable foods. Together, Refresh and the Nourish Network welcome you to our webinar today. Next slide, please. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. As we gather for this meeting, physically dispersed and virtually constructed, let us take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place and in doing so, recognise the various traditional lands on which we do our business today. We acknowledge the elders, past, present and emerging, of all the land we work and live. With gratitude and respect, and to recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community. I pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present today, as well as any custodians of international lands. Next slide, please. So today, this presentation will be recorded and you'll be able to find it on the Refresh and Nourish Network websites shortly after the event. If you have any questions for our presenters today, please put them in the Zoom chat. And if you could please make sure your microphones are muted during the presentations. Next slide, please. So I'll hand over now to Associate Professor Adrian Cameron, who's going to introduce our speaker, Katrine Duus, and then after which we'll have a Q&A discussion with Associate Professor Julia Brimblecombe and Dr. Megan Ferguson, following which we'll open up to questions from the audience. Over to you, Adrian.
Great, thank you, Sian. So I'm Adrian Cameron. I'm one of the Associate Directors of Deakin's Global Centre for Preventative Health and Nutrition, or GLOBE. And we've been privileged to have had Katrine here for 2 months. She's got a month to go on a stay during her PhD. And Katrine's PhD is exploring the pros and cons of a partnership between researchers and supermarket retailers. And so I think it was pretty clear to Katrine and to us that there's a lot of synergies between her work and the work that we do in Refresh, which is what led to the connection. So we've been really pleased to have you with us, Katrine. And we've had a lot of fascinating conversations about, the differences between our contexts and how working with retailers goes. But what I thought is really unique about Katrine's work is that she brings an ethnographic perspective, and that's really effective at telling the story of how you work with retailers and what happens when you do that. And so I hope her presentation will provide lots of food for thought for anyone who wants to create change in the retail space by working in partnership. So yeah, we're very grateful to you, Katrine, for choosing to come and work with us in Refresh. And I really hope that everyone enjoys your presentation. And I'm also looking forward to Megan and Julie's reflections on your work at the end. So over to you.
Thank you, Adrian, and good day, everyone. I'm very excited to see that so many are joining in today to hear me speak about this topic. As said, my name is Katrine Duus, and I'm currently conducting my PhD studies at the National Institute of Public Health, which is part of the University of Southern Denmark, or in short, SDU. Today I will present learnings, experiences, and preliminary findings from my PhD project, which is titled Healthier Choices in Supermarkets, an ethnographic and system-oriented evaluation of the development and implementation of health-promoting initiatives targeting families with young children. And a small disclaimer, none of the findings I will present here today is just yet published, but hopefully they will be within the next year. Next slide, please. First, I would like to acknowledge that my PhD project is part of a larger study named the Healthier Choices in Supermarkets study. And this study has 3 work packages. The first is the development and feasibility testing of new health-promoting retail initiatives, which is the one my project is linked to, and the only one I will address today. The second one is geographical mapping of shopping patterns in obesity in Denmark. And the third is an evaluation of retailer-led refurbishment in 2 supermarket chains, where they, for example, have increased the area dedicated to fresh fruit and vegetables. And at the bottom of this slide, I put forward the excellent team of researchers that I work with on this study. Next slide, please. Another important aspect of the study and what I will present today is that the study involves two external partners. One is the Danish Cancer Society, which is a Danish NGO that advocates the interest of cancer patients and the prevention of cancers in Denmark. They have provided the funding for conducting the study, and the research group at the National Institute of Public Health also hired experts from the Department of Prevention and Information to help with the development of this new retail initiatives. And the second partner in the study is Salling Group. Next slide, please. So Salling Group represents the retailer in this project, and they agreed to participate in the development and testing of new initiatives in one of their stores. And just a few facts about Salling Group. So they are the largest retailer in Denmark, and they also have businesses in Germany and Poland. It is a private business that is 100% owned by the Salling Foundations, and they therefore have no shareholders. The foundation invests back in the development of the business, and then they give out donations to, for example, sport activities, charities, science, and education. The newest numbers show that Salling Group holds 35% of the market share in Denmark, and they own 5 supermarket chains. Salling and the newest one, Basalt, only holds a few stores, whereas Føtex, Netto, and Bilka are found in all regions of Denmark. And Føtex is highlighted here in bold, that this is the chain we have worked with in this study. Next slide, please. In Denmark, we, as in Australia and many other parts of the world, experience a high prevalence of overweight and obesity. And we acknowledge that the cause is multifaceted and are still not fully understood. However, there remain consensus of dying being one modifiable risk factor. In Denmark, supermarkets is a dominant part of the food environment, and it's therefore interesting to explore if and how we can influence it to promote healthier choices for customers. Next slide, please. So today I will elaborate on 3 studies of my PhD project. First, I will tell you the story of how the partnership unfolded during the development process of the healthy retail initiatives, and what we can learn from that. Secondly, I will address the question, how well were the initiatives implemented and what promotes and hinders the implementation? And lastly, moving a bit away from the specific initiatives in the store, what will influence the food purchasing behavior of families, and how can these be addressed in future interventions? Next slide, please. So I just mentioned for the first study, I am telling the story of how the partnership unfolded during the development of the healthy retail initiatives that were to be implemented in one of Salling Group's stores. And I've looked at the time from when Salling Group entered the study to the day when the initiatives were implemented in the store. And this is a period of almost 2.5 years. To explore this, I have conducted extensive fieldwork where I have made participant observations of different in-person meetings between the partners. I have also collected and analyzed a huge amount of documents, which includes meeting minutes, project materials, and emails sent between the partners. And lastly, I conducted interviews with key stakeholders from all 3 partners. Next slide, please. So to help me unfold my empirical data and understand the process and the events that had happened, I've drawn from different theoretical perspectives. Firstly, I found inspiration in Niels Åkerström Andersen's book about partnership from 2008, where he called partnerships possibility-making machines. Andersen's argued that a partnership is a contract about the development of contracts. By this, he means that in a partnership, 2 or more organizations come together around a shared goal and not pre-specified tasks, as these tasks will form within the partnership. Otherwise, he argues that it would just be outsourcing. Secondly, I found inspiration in theories of negotiation, and I build on the understanding that negotiations are an interaction which requires both relational and task-oriented behaviors, and that the professional roles of the representatives affects the negotiation. And lastly, I've used perspectives of institutional logics, which can be understood as the dominant way of thinking and doing of each partner. Institutional logics are often rooted in professions, and you can, for example, talk about a market logic or a research logic. Within this perspective, there's a concept called cooptation, and this is when one institution adopts elements from other institutions. And this is often seen when logics conflict and can be used to either maintain power or to promote collaboration. Next one. For the analysis, I wrote out the full story of the development process in a chronological order. And from this telling and the theoretical perspectives, I identified 6 phases of the process. And these phases each illustrate the potentials and pitfalls of the partnership and show how the initiatives for the feasibility test came to be. So the first phase is called a great opportunity. It includes the initial meeting between the research group and the retailer, which was a random encounter at an event hosted by the Danish Cancer Society. This meeting led to selling group agreeing to partnering up with the institute and and they did this partly because they saw it as an opportunity to promote themselves positively. And they also quickly put the partnership up on their website and in their CSR report. The researchers also saw it as a great opportunity to influence public health, secure funding for the project, and establish them within the field. The conversation made at the event and in the period just after formed the expectations of the possibility of the partnership. The impression that was given from the retailer was that everything is possible. And these expectations came to influence the behavior of both the researchers and the Danish Cancer Society for the rest of the process. The second phase is called What Can and Will We Do? Here, the more practical side of the developing the initiatives began. And we start to see that everything is, of course, not possible. Through the selection of the store for the feasibility test, a walkthrough, the test store with all 3 partners, and following dialogue about more than 20 specific ideas from the Danish Cancer Society, the conflict between the partners' logics began to show. And these conflicts were at times a barrier. However, at others, the conflicts created a base for learning. In the third phase, facing the real world, the ideas of a handful of initiatives were to be explored and finally developed by the Danish Cancer Society. In this process, they visit the store to check up on product selection and store layout. And doing this, the Danish Cancer Society actually came to question the initiatives. Would it actually be possible to measure the effect? And would it be possible to change customers' behavior? Despite this uncertainty, the planning process continued. And in this phase, I found that the research group begins to express that the project is more a test of the partnership and the collaboration with the retailers than a test of finding the most effective initiatives. And this understanding conflicts with the ones of the Danish Cancer Society. And it might explain why the Danish Cancer Society questioned the initiatives and the research group wants to keep going. Next slide, please. In the fourth phase, called staff turnover, the contact person from selling group changed job, and a new contact person was introduced. This led to a state of misalignment, where the retailer all of a sudden were 2 steps ahead of the research group. The new contact person reported at the first meeting with the researchers that they were weeks from implementing some of the initiatives. However, when the researchers expressed that they needed a bit more time to conduct some pre-investigations in the store, the retailers agreed to push the implementation date a month. And as some of the initiative was still not ready at this point, the implementation was postponed yet again. All in all, this period became kind of hectic, where both the retailers and the researchers expressed fear. The researchers were afraid that the retailer would back out if they did not follow along, and the retailers were afraid that they were actually not moving fast enough or delivered what had been promised. In the fifth phase, that represents just one sort that were made to finalize one of the initiatives. And during this visit, the differences in understanding of health showed. The interesting part, though, is that the stricter perception of health shifted between the store manager and the representative from the Danish Cancer Society. For example, the store manager claimed that none of his ready-to-serve salads would meet her health standards, whereas she argued that the focus was just getting people to eat more vegetables. At this visit, a new initiative was also randomly suggested by the Danish Cancer Society, and it ended up being included in the plan for the feasibility test that were now to run 2 months later. In the last phase, called unforeseen events, we see how the project were faced with changes in both the main contact person in selling group and the store manager in the test store, just a few weeks before the planned feasibility test. The researchers did have concern about these changes in staff, and they also learned that everything was not ready for the feasibility test. Moreover, at this time, a very strict COVID-19 lockdown was implemented in Denmark. And due to these unforeseen events, it was decided to postpone the test till the restriction has lifted. From the interviews, I found that the new persons on the project did not feel ownership with the project, and they did not find all the initiative meaningful, and this led to one of them being dropped. Moreover, the contact person from selling group did think that the time frame for realizing the initiative was too short and that too much had been promised. I also found that the Danish Cancer Society and the research group lacked understanding of the challenges that the retailers expressed and began to lose trust with them. These negative feelings on both sides led to more strained relationships at the end of the development process that might influence the future of the partnership. Next slide. So what do we take from these learnings? I have put my current thoughts into 4 main messages. First of all, partnerships with retailers are fragile, and from our experience, then you should be very careful with them, as the action made and things said could affect the future behavior of all involved. And we also have to be aware of the potential conflicts of interest of all partners. Secondly, expect the unexpected and plan for it. So what is the strategy when someone is replaced and the contact person does not respond anymore? And what do we do if a pandemic or even a war hits us? Do we have some flexibility in terms of time and money in the project, or do we have to cut some ends? The third message is to take time to discuss the different perspectives of the partners involved. How does everyone define health? How do we think of customer behavior, and so forth? This might open up learnings and new ideas for all the partners. And I think the goal is not necessarily coming to agreement, but it is understanding of each other's point of view. And this leads to the final message, which is forming a shared understanding. In my run-through of the story, I left out the discussion of a written agreement or contract. And there were not formed any written agreement or contract in the study. However, it was talked about on many occasions and commented on in several of the interviews as something that was missing. Drawing on the theories of partnership, a shared understanding in writing is also suggested. However, it should be open-ended and describe goals instead of specific tasks. Moreover, in a Danish study of innovation partnerships, they have explored what the degree of formalization, for example, these written agreements, does to partnership outcomes. And they found that a higher degree of formalization hampers the innovation of partnerships. Next slide. So moving on to the second study of my PhD, I will now tell you more about the initiative that came from that long process and how the feasibility testing of them went. To explore the implementation, I conducted observations in the store and informal conversations with customers and staff, just before and under and after the implementation. And I also conducted semi-structured interviews with the project manager from the change marketing department and the store manager. Here I've outlined the design of the feasibility test. So we had just one test store, as I said a couple of times. And this store is located, next slide, please. Yeah, there it is. So, so this test store is located in a highly populated area in Copenhagen, which is the capital of Denmark. And the area the store is located in has been described to have more health-aware people with good financial resources. The comparison group is going to be the rest of the chain, which count just over 100 stores. And we tested 4 initiatives for a minimum of 6 weeks. We are to do a mixed method evaluation, combining the findings I will present some of today with analysis of sales data from the retailer. However, the analysis of the sales data is still to be conducted, as the retailer still haven't given us the data, which we have been waiting for in over a year now. Next slide, please. So the first initiative I'm showing you here aim to promote the buys of healthier breakfast products and cereals. For this, we use shelf tag labelings that the retailer produced for the test. These tags highlight products that have either one or both of 2 front of package labelings that we use in Denmark. The green one is the keyhole logo, which indicate healthier option within the category, and it has standards for sugar, fat, and salt. And the orange one is the whole grain logo, which shows whole grain options. And both these labels are well established and were not new at the time of the implementation. Next slide, please. For this initiative, we found that it was almost fully implemented in the first 4 weeks. Hereafter, we saw that more and more tags were missing as they would fall off. We did have an agreement with the store that the employments would check on the tags once a week to put up missing tags. We did also see that one sign during the whole period were misplaced. The response of the customers were not too promising for the effect of the initiatives. Customers replied that they did not notice the tags or were not using these labels when deciding which products to buy. An observation also indicated that many customers had already decided on what they would buy, as they would just quickly pick up a product when they rushed by the shelves. The project manager from the change marketing department said that she found the initiative to be great, as it increases transparency for the customers. However, she also expressed the challenges of maintenance and that the chain were trying to reduce printed materials as part of their sustainability strategy. Next slide. So the second initiative I'm presenting to you and that we implemented is a downsizing of sodas displayed in coolers at the checkout desk. The idea here is to change the product so the customers get a smaller volume of soda and thereby will hopefully will consume less. From the picture, you can see that the Coca-Cola variants have been changed from a 500 ml plastic bottle to a 250 ml can. This was not the optimal choice for any of the partners, which would have been a 375 ml bottle that have been a campaign product when planning the initiative. However, the supplier was not able or willing to deliver this product for the test, and we ended up with the small can instead. Next slide. If you view the 250 ml cans as the right side for the test, we see that it was implemented fully for 5 out of the 6 weeks. Looking closer to the responses to the initiative, the project manager from Ferguson Marketing here commented on the issue with the size that I just explained. From her statement, we get the impression that it's not unwillingness from their side that hinders the implementation. It is the small scale of the test and lack of time to plan it with the supplier. And from the observations in store, we detected no distinct changes in customer behavior around these coolers, and there were no expression of discontent or excitement with the initiative. This is positive, as we do not want people to start buying multiple items or going to other parts of the store to find the larger portion sizes. Next slide, please. The third initiative also uses downsizing, and here we focused on the pick and mix candy to nudge people to buy less candy. For the test, we had new smaller bags produced. The way they were made smaller was that the fold-out bottom of the bags were removed. The idea was that the bag would then look fuller with less candy in it. Next slide, please. The initiative turned out to be very difficult to implement, and several different versions of the bags were tried out at the store. The issue with the bag were that they were difficult to hang in the existing system and difficult to grab and use by the customers, which was a deal breaker for the store manager. When the right solution was found, we find that it was implemented fully for 5 weeks. During the second week, we found that the old and larger bags have been hung in front of the new ones, making the large bag the option customers would use. For the responses to the initiative, we observed no awareness among the customers of the change in the bag, which is positive for the initiative. However, we did find that customers decided the amount of candy by number of pieces or a predetermined weight, which meant that kids would run to the scale again and again till they reached that number. And this would have worked against the mechanism we were trying to use. The project manager highlighted that this initiative was interesting as it was a stealth intervention, where if we compared it to the initiative with the sodas, would change the behavior of the customers without them noticing. In her opinion, this was not a problem, as people here paid per gram. However, she also commented on the fact that if the initiative was successful, the chain would make less money. The specific result would therefore be something that they would have to take into consideration when deciding if the initiative was something they would implement in the chain. Next slide. The last initiative we tested originated from the wish of the retailer to offer healthy alternative to a complimentary bond that they would offer children shopping with their parents. The choice fell on a banana, which would be handed out from the bakery sale in the store where the buns had formerly been offered from. So in the picture, you can see a basket with bananas sitting on the counter. And there were also placed a sign that read, "Get a free organic banana for your child while you're shopping." Next slide, please. We detected no problems in the implementation of this initiative. However, the retailer decided the customer who still wanted the bond could get it on their request, and this was to avoid unhappy customers. From the observation, we learned that customers had different responses to the initiatives. Some were very pleased with being offered a banana, and others would still prefer the bun, which the store manager found were in particular the stroller parents, as he called them, as a banana in the hands of younger children would make a mess. And then we saw those who would both take the banana and then buy a bun. The store manager had a clear indication that it was the majority who were pleased with the initiative. And he also explained that after the 6 weeks, they would continue to hand out bananas to those who asked for them. The project manager said that she was surprised how many that preferred the banana. However, she also commented on the cost of the initiative and explained that it was at least twice expensive to offer the banana than the buns, which again make the financial consideration important for the sustainability of the initiative. She also told that the focus on a healthy alternative pushed an ongoing development of a more nutritious one. Next slide, please. In conclusion to this study, I again have 4 preliminary main messages. The first being that the supermarkets show a general capacity to implement new initiatives. The retailer produced all the materials for the initiatives. They made deals with the suppliers, and they put together slides to explain the initiatives for the employees at the store. And the staff at the store put all the materials up and did the ongoing maintenance. And the retailer also accounted for all costs associated with the implementation. The second measure is that initiatives focused on downsizing demanded close collaboration with the suppliers, and also prototype testing, and generally more time to prepare and implement. The third method is that the initiative that used the printed materials demanded maintenance and was at risk of being misplaced. For future intervention, that is something that the researchers could take on them to take some of the work from the staff at the store. And lastly, customers' response seemed very important for retailers wishing to sustain initiatives. Next slide, please. In my third study that I've just finished the data collection for this January, I explore what influences families' food purchasing behavior. I've conducted 15 semi-structured interviews with parents, and then half of them I did shop-along interviews with, where I asked them about what they were thinking as they shopped. And then I also did, and then follow-up interviews with them. The other half participated in interviews that were prompted by photos they took themselves during and after shopping. And this resulted in 37 individual interviews for analysis. Next slide, please. I have not finalized the analysis, but I will just briefly present some preliminary findings. The first being that grocery shopping and deciding which food and drinks to buy is an emotional behavior. And secondly, that the inflation of 2022 following the war in Ukraine that led to considerable increases in food prices in Denmark provoked a new need for balancing personal values with economical considerations. Next slide, please. So, both positive and negative emotions around shopping were observed among the parents. For example, this mother of 4 found supermarket shopping uncomfortable and a waste of time, whereas this mother of 2 found shopping to be a rare time out that she enjoyed. And then I have this father of 2 that found grocery shopping inspiring and a chance to do something with his children, which he would regularly do on the weekends. I did also observe that the overall feeling about grocery shopping reflected in the way that the parents acted in the store. Next slide. I conducted the study during what seemed to be the peak of the inflation in 2022, which all the parents had some reflections on. And some had experienced the need to change their shopping patterns as the regular choices, for example, buying organic products, had become too expensive, as this mother of 1 explains. For some, this need to compromise led to negative feelings, for example, bad conscience, as this mother of 2 in the beige box expressed. Others expressed gratitude for the fact that they had not experienced the need to compromise with the usual choices, and this other mother of 2 explains. And this highlights that families experience the influence of the inflation very differently. Next slide. Summing up on my third study, I do find that parents have different feelings about grocery shopping, which affect their interaction with the physical setting of the supermarket. Secondly, I do think that future intervention should account for the importance that emotions seem to have in this behavior when they're targeting families with young children. And keep in mind, and also keep in mind that feelings about grocery shopping can both be positive and negative. And lastly, a methodological consideration. I do find that shop-along interviews can provide new insights to the research of customer behavior and development of interventions in supermarkets. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, I will just share some reflections on next step. So in terms of the evaluation of the health promoting initiatives, we still have to finalize the analysis when we hopefully get the data from the retailer. And then we really want to present our findings to our partners and discuss what we can take from this test. Looking at the partnership, then the issue with the data and the shift in focus at the retailer to look more sustainable has kind of left us in an impasse where we're not moving forward with new initiatives or tests in the stores. So I think we have to rebuild the relationship with them if we wish to uphold this partnership. And to do this, we also have to secure additional funding as the current funding ends in 2024. So after covering here to Australia, it's been very interesting to hear from Refresh researchers about their experiences and how they are similar but sometimes different to our experience in Denmark. In particular, it's been interesting to think more about the conflicts of interest involved in this type of work and how funding of these kind of projects, but also in-kind support and how the project can be used to promote the different partners can influence decisions that are made. And I've also been very pleased to learn that the Refresh researchers are working on best practice guidance documents for conducting this type of research, which I look forward to reading and build new research from. Next slide. Yeah, so thank you for your attention and thank you to the Refresh and Nourish Network for the opportunity to share my research.
Thanks, Katrine. That was fantastic. I'd now like to invite both Julie and Megan to reflect on Katrine's presentation.
Thanks so much, Sian. I think I'm going to take the lead with this. Wonderful, Katrine. Thanks so much for sharing your experience. It was fascinating to sit and listen to that and learn from the work that you've done. As Adrian said, I also want to thank you for choosing Australia to come to and to be with Deakin and now sort of sharing more broadly. I'm sure we've got lots of policymakers, practitioners, and I know researchers here today that will be fascinated by this. And hopefully this is as equally beneficial to you and the work that you and your partners contribute to do back home. So certainly, like in other countries and in Denmark, Australia, obviously there's a growing interest in these partnerships between food retailers and researchers to test health enabling strategies in the retail setting. And, it's not always straightforward, even though there's really huge benefits. So it is interesting to listen to other experiences and particularly hear from your experience with the Selling Group or Foundation rather. I was really looking forward to hearing about how that partnership process was developed and what you've learned from that. And you've encapsulated that really well for us. And I was fascinated by thinking about sort of the theory that you've taken into account there. And I loved that early commentary around, oh yeah, everything is possible. It kind of made me feel like, oh yeah, I know where you're coming from. And I think for me, I was reflecting on, there's some things that we're very lucky for here and hopefully that is useful to you in learning, from us and from others working in this space. But it's always important for us to remember that things do change. Like even if things might be working quite well, things do change and how we can learn from these experiences. Like, we might have some significant staff turnover and that could work against us in some cases. And sometimes it's actually, works to progress things. And so it's making the most of that opportunity and working forward with that. And I suppose, and Julie, I'm sure will add to what I've got to say here, but so the space that we work in, for those of you who don't know the work of Julie Brimblecombe and myself and others that we work with, is we're very lucky to work with retailers in remote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. in designing and implementing priorities that they have. And this has been built on, there's a really, really long history, and there's people here on this webinar who've been involved, particularly, I think Mandy Lee, I saw there earlier, have been involved in setting the pathway with working with industry along many, many decades. I think we're 4 or 5 decades into this work. And I think that's where one of the strengths of it is. One of the other things that is really understanding that governance. And so I was interested in listening to the governance that you talked about, because that's so crucial in understanding where those decisions are made. And so, you know, we're lucky here in this setting that not always, but a lot of the time that the store directors are the decision makers. So they're community members themselves, and their customers are their family members. And so they can really drive that priority. But at the same time, they've got massive challenges. And so, you know, thinking about how we continue to keep the design that we've all agreed to, and to manage that while they've got a number of challenges to deal with at the same time, and how much we work around that is interesting. Certainly, I think one of the things that has helped in this setting is the value of industry having research experience. So I think there's a value of the more they build on that. So there'll be learnings from this experience, even if they're not always positive outcomes, and what can come next. And so same in that we've got researchers now with industry experience as well. And I think that strength is really, really important, because you can start to see where some of the things that might go wrong and put plans in place. But exactly as you say, there's still that expect the unexpected. And for me, I constantly struggle with this, is how we allow enough time, like the time it takes to develop a lot of things in the event that something may or may not happen in what is already a really, really time intensive role for researchers, for retailers. Like, how much time do we expect them to give in planning for something that may not happen? But it, like this case shows how critical that is. But yeah, so for me, really, like, thank you. The key messages were really important. I feel like we need to use some of that to reflect on where we're at in a number of stages, and potentially even start to report on that particular, you know, how those relationships are sustained and how they develop in this space. But thank you very much for that. And I'm sure Julie will have more to add.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Fantastic reflection, Megan, thank you. And Katrine, thank you so much for that presentation of yours. It was fascinating. I love the way that you framed your presentation. Right up the front, you talked about partnerships. And so I want to elaborate a little bit about partnerships as well, because I just see partnerships as being central and absolutely key to the work that we're doing with the food retail sector. We can't do the work without partnerships. There has to be that co-benefit. There has to be that respect between the partners. There has to be that relationship that's built over time. And most importantly, that trust, but also that flexibility and responsiveness to change. But one of the things that I want to pick up was about capacity. And I think you talked about that a lot. And I think that's where we're at with food retail research, because we've jumped into trying to understand, we've got this issue. We have to try to address, you know, preventable chronic disease, overweight and obesity, and the outcomes of the food system, this modern kind of food system that we've got at the moment. And so it just makes sense to work with the food retail sector and try to work out what are the different types of strategies that might be effective. So I feel like we've done some really good research in coming up with what is that evidence, what might be those strategies. But I think it's fantastic that you're really focusing on how do we engage with food retailers, how do we develop those partnerships, and where do we need to put the capacity? Because I think what you demonstrated is that everybody kind of jumped into this, you know, seeing that there was going to be co-benefits. it was going to lead to innovation. But then the complexity starts to unravel. So I think it's, you know, understanding that pathway so that we can build that capacity. So one thing that, an approach that we've taken to that in the remote context that Megan's described, where a lot of our work is based, is to try to accelerate that. Like, partnerships take time, relationships take time to build. And so how can we help build that capacity between the public health practitioners as well as the food retailers? But also, how can we get to a stage where we've got an understanding of what are going to be the most effective kind of strategies to put in place? So Megan, for example, has led the development of a series of different types of policy options that food retailers could potentially put in place that would lead to best practice change as well as positive outcomes in terms of purchasing. So we found that this is an effective way to start to engage with food retailers. It's structured, but it's still allowing for innovation, and it's still allowing for the retail expertise to come through, because they still have to select what approach they're going to take in their setting to try to put these types of policies in place. So, so my question from your presentation is, in thinking about this capacity, do you think that providing that kind of structure is important, and therefore we need to, you know, help build the capacity of the practitioners that are engaging with the food retailers? Or do we really need to help build the capacity of the food retailers so that they've got some principles that they can apply to try to identify what are the types of food products that they could be focusing on, and what are the types of strategies that they might put in place and give a go? So that's one question. But I also just wanted to touch on social license and social responsibility, because in the context where we work, we found that where social purpose, where there's a strong sense of social purpose with food retailers, that's when there's reception to take on board these types of health enabling policies. And it seems that the Selling Foundation, perhaps that's the purpose that they entered into this relationship with, is, you know, they had concerns about their community. They wanted to, of course, run a viable business and make a profit, but also contribute to social purpose. So, yeah, I suppose I've got a question about the Selling Foundation, and also, you know, do we need to help build the capacity of retailers through providing some examples of best practice, best policy for, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Julie, for those questions. Very good questions, and something I haven't spent a lot of time reflecting on just yet. But I think, like with the capacity part that you talk about here, I think it would be amazing that if we could, focus on building this capacity within the retailers, instead of, as I heard you said, like, have the capacity at the researchers, because then we, like, again and again maybe have to go in this field or work together with the retailers. But if they could have these capacity within the organizations and work from them, I think it would have like really great potential. But it's very interesting if that could happen, and if they would be interested in going that way, I guess. And your second question, like, Can you?
My second question was around that social responsibility, by the Salads Foundation.
Yeah. So, so as I touch upon, like they going into the partnership, we had this feeling that they were both genuinely interested in promoting public health, but they also had like this more business oriented motivation of like promoting their business. But I really think like from working with them, I see that they really have this genuine interest in this field, and I can see, and they have told me a lot about other initiatives that they have made. They were the first retail group in Denmark who decided to hide away tobacco products in their store before it was like mandatory by law, and they got like all the other retailers in that as well, and they also as touch upon, like they only sell organic bananas in their stores, like in this chain, and they decided like to take the conventional ones out from what knowledge they have gotten about the health risk about non-organic bananas, for example, and they do some of these things with knowing that they will reflect badly back on the financial part of their business, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, I think it's always about finding that sweet spot between the social group and making sure that profits aren't going to be impacted.
And I haven't really like I've tried to talk with them and like figure out where is it, like when is something that bad to health that you want to do something, and when is it not. But and I'm not sure they know either. Like it may be like a case-to-case thing, like reflections they made, but it's interesting like how they juggle these things.
If anyone does have further questions for Katrine, please pop them in the chat box. But we do have a question from Adrian here, wondering if there's a role for the health promotion workforce to help the retailers to implement or maintain the initiatives, or in this instance, does the retailer prefer to do it all themselves?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it maybe relates to what I said, that they were actually driving most of the implementation in this. And from my experience, like we offered a lot of times, like asking if we could help in any way with some of these issues that we came across, but like they didn't really seem to take this help. So I don't know if we should like say we really want to do like this specific task or leave it to them. That's but as I said, like we could help with when we see that signs are misplaced or have fallen off. We could still like go and correct these things, for example.
Oh, it's interesting. Just a brief question for me. I was wondering, even though the relationship with the retailer has stalled, have you noticed that they've taken on or kept any of the initiative components that were tested?
Yeah, so I kept going to the store frequently after what we tested some of the initiatives, and with like the shelf tags, we saw that they lingered on, but when I talked to the store manager, it was like more a thing of them not like, it was not part of their usual protocol, like these tags, so no one knew that they had to take them down after these 6 weeks, so they would just stay on until they fell off. But again, with with the banana for children, it was something that they would keep giving. Like the storeman was like, I want to keep my customers happy, so if they want it, I will give it to them. And we also saw, we have like the idea that some of the conversations we had with the retailers about different initiatives, like they didn't have got to have a place in this specific study, but they worked on with the ideas and maybe found some other partners that they could work with. An example is that we really wanted to help parents select like healthier snack options for their children. So we wanted like to display them, but it was very difficult and we couldn't like figure out how to do it. But we do know that they are now working with a different partner on developing healthier snack options for children. So I have this idea, like we push that within the organization. Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thanks. I think in the interest of time, we might begin to wrap up, but I'd like to thank Katrine, Julie, and Megan for taking the time to share their expertise and their insights with us today, and to also thank everyone who's attended today. Could I have the final slides brought up, please? Thanks. So as everyone who's joined us today has an interest in healthy food retail, I'd just like to briefly mention 2 opportunities to tell you about. So first of all is the Healthy Supermarkets Community of Practice, which is run by the Nourish Network and Vic Health. So this group is open to interstate and international people who are interested in improving the healthiness of food environments in supermarkets, and you'll see the address there to get involved. Secondly, next slide please. In July this year, Refresh will be offering another iteration of our online short course for transforming food retail environments to be health enabling. So this course has a micro-credential component that can also be used as a credit towards the Masters of Public Health. So if you have any questions or reflections on what we've talked about today, please reach out to the presenters or get in contact with either Refresh or the Nourish Network. The next slide, please. And you can find the, you can get in contact with us at these addresses and also our Twitter addresses there if you'd like to follow us to learn more about our work. So thank you all again for today, and the recording of today's webinar will be online on both the Refresh and Nourish Network websites shortly. So thank you again, Katrine, for a fantastic presentation, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll just wait a couple of minutes while the rest of our attendees join.